If you subscribe to me, I'd be even more happy than I am now. This case takes place in the USA in 2017. A brutal attack on a train shocked a community and reverberated across the nation. The incident involved a man whose views and violent history culminated in a deadly confrontation. Meet Jeremy Joseph Christian. Jeremy was born on the 5th of January 1982. His upbringing was somewhat regular. He obtained a high school diploma and attended a community college for a year, and worked at a pizza restaurant to get by. However, from his high school days, things deteriorated for Jeremy as he fell into criminality. In May of 2002, at the age of 20, Jeremy was convicted of kidnapping and robbing a convenience store. During this incident, he wore a ski mask and brandished a revolver. After robbing the shop at gunpoint, he handcuffed the store owner to a pole before fleeing the scene. But he didn't get very far. The police caught up to him just a few blocks away. Jeremy pulled out his gun. As a result, a police officer thought that he was a deadly threat and shot at him 3 times. All but one bullet missed. The bullet that hit him grazed his right cheek, leaving to a lifelong scar. Jeremy was sentenced to 19 months in the Oregon Department of Corrections for the crime. During his incarceration, he was described as violent and a risk to himself. Therefore, he spent most of his time in solitary confinement. Following his release in 2012, Jeremy returned to jail for 6 months on a weapons charge, and then was arrested again the following year in 2013. When he was released again, he had no fixed address and just sofa surfed amongst his friends and family. Jeremy never married or had any serious relationships. He would later say that he felt marginalized by society due to being an ex-con. As a result, this led him down a path of extreme ideologies. In April of 2017, Jeremy's extremist views became ever more apparent. On the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, he praised the murderous Timothy McVeigh. His social media was littered with neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic and far-right material. He identified as a white nationalist, but his ideological stance was complex and often contradictory. He expressed a bizarre mix of views, including a desire to live amongst Brazil's indigenous people, and altered between supporting Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. His increasingly erratic behavior worried his few friends, who believed that he needed mental help, although no formal diagnosis was ever made. In April of 2017, he attended the alleged right-wing March for Free Speech, organized by Patriot Prayer. He was draped in a Revolutionary War-era flag and armed with a baseball bat. He drew widespread attention by performing Nazi salutes and spewing racial slurs at the crowd, his presence radiating hostility and aggression. He was even caught on video shouting, "Die Muslims," a chilling preview of the violent hatred to come. Jeremy's life was now marked by instability and alienation. But by May of 2017, he had plummeted to the lowest depths of his descent. Unhinged and volatile, he was ready to explode. On the 25th of May 2017, at around 11:30 p.m, Jeremy engaged in aggressive and threatening behavior on a Max Light rail train in Portland. During this journey, he was ranting and making violent and racially charged remarks. When he got onto the train, he made remarks that the driver looked like an effing Muslim. People's heads turned as he became more and more aggressive, and even began threatening to stab people. During this incident, Jeremy directed racial slurs and threats towards a woman named Demetria Hester, who was an African-American woman. Demetria was going about her own business on her way home from a shift working in a restaurant, when Jeremy stared into her eyes and threatened to stab her. He followed this up with more racial attacks. Jeremy told Demetria that she didn't have the right to be on the train because she was black. When she left the train, Jeremy followed her. He continued to hurl racial attacks at her before throwing a full plastic Gatorade bottle at her face, hitting her in the eye. It's at this point that Jeremy again threatened to kill her. In response, she used mace to defend herself, spraying Jeremy in the face. The police were called to the scene, but in the end, Jeremy wasn't even arrested. In fact, when the police arrived, they turned their attentions towards Demetria, asking to see her identification, whilst Jeremy walked away. She felt as if the police viewed her as the aggressor for using mace, disregarding the context of the attack and the initial physical and verbal attacks she had to endure. Little did the police know, they had just squandered their only chance to prevent Jeremy from continuing his campaign of hatred and escalating his aggression towards non-white people. Only 17 hours later, chaos ensued. Walio Mohammed was a 17-year-old born in Somalia and had come to the US in December of 2005 at the age of 5. She had attended several schools and integrated with American culture well, but had always maintained her traditions and religion. She was a devout Muslim. On the 26th of May 2017, Walio and her best friend Destiny decided to catch the MAX train to the local shopping mall. However, the two friends were heading in the wrong direction. They didn't realize this until they started to enter downtown Portland. It was at this point that they decided to get off the train to board the same Green Line train towards the mall. This was an innocent mistake, and by a twist of fate, it placed them on the wrong train at the wrong time. The girls were wearing skirts and blouses that day, and Walio completed her school outfit with a hijab, a headscarf worn by Muslims to cover their hair. The girls had lived in the States for over a decade, and they had never experienced any hate crimes. But on this day, the hijab caught the attention of Jeremy Christian, who was sat only meters away. Jeremy began acting erratically again, only 17 hours after his verbal attacks on Demetria. He began shouting aggressive racial slurs whilst waving a Bible above his head. He began ranting about Christians, Muslims and Jews, before turning to Walio and Destiny and telling them to go back to Saudi Arabia. The two girls decided to move away from Jeremy as he got closer, louder and more aggressive. They were petrified. A large African-American man then turned to the girls and said that everything would be okay, but this wasn't comforting as Jeremy appeared to be extremely aggressive, and tensions escalated. A group of men then formed a barrier between Jeremy Christian and these two girls. These men were 23-year-old Taliesin Murdin Namkai Mesh, 21-year-old Micah Fletcher, and 53-year-old Ricky Best. Jeremy repeatedly shouted at the girls, telling them to get out of his country. Micah told him to shut up and leave the girls alone, but Jeremy ignored him. Taliesin suspected that the situation was going to get out of hand, so he pulled out his phone and began to record. Jeremy then turned towards Taliesin and whacked his mobile phone out of his hands right before he could press record. Taliesin then stood up to confront Jeremy on this escalation. Jeremy mirrored this action, positioning himself in front of Taliesin, daring him to act. Jeremy shouted in his face, saying, "Do something." It was at this point that Micah also stood up and faced off Jeremy. At the same time, Ricky Best stepped toward the group standing behind Taliesin. And with this, Jeremy Christian secretly drew a 3.75-inch folding knife from his pocket, keeping it behind his right leg. Jeremy pushed Taliesin, and then Micah pushed Jeremy. Micah attempted to defuse the situation by urging Jeremy to leave the train. But in one chilling motion, Jeremy flicked out his folding knife. The train had arrived at the station, and its doors were open, yet Jeremy remained on board. His mind was set, and his intent was unwavering. The time was 4:32 p.m., and the train was at a standstill. In a swift and shocking move, Jeremy raised the knife and slashed Micah Fletcher across the neck. He staggered backwards onto a seat, clutching his throat. Jeremy then advanced towards Taliesin and Ricky. With two swings, he slashed both of their throats. While Micah Fletcher fell towards the seat and out of Jeremy's sight, Ricky Best and Taliesin remained within his reach. As if slashing their throats wasn't enough, Jeremy Christian unleashed a barrage of stabbings at them both. There was so much blood being sprayed that a witness entering the train mistook the blood spray for rain. After a 12-second disturbing rampage, the whole train descended into chaos. Passengers on the train witnessed a brutal attack, which rendered Taliesin and Ricky unconscious on the floor, bleeding out. The only sound reaching over the screams of others was Micah crying out for someone to help him, whilst his throat was ejecting blood. Walio and Destiny fled the train in terror, abandoning their belongings. Their minds were unable to grasp the horror of what they had just witnessed. They were unable to comprehend how someone could unleash such unimaginable violence for no real reason at all. Following the violence, Jeremy took his bag and Walio's bag and casually walked off the train. As he stepped foot outside of the train, he held up his blade pointing towards bystanders on the platform, shouting, "Does anyone else want some?" Some passengers began chasing him over the overpass and into a neighbourhood, calling 911 and requesting the police. Meanwhile, other passengers remained on the train, trying to keep the 3 injured men alive. Several bystanders performed CPR on Taliesin and Ricky, and first aid on Micah until the emergency medical services arrived. The medics did everything they could, but they were unable to revive Ricky Best, and he was declared dead at the scene. Taliesin was rushed to the hospital, but tragically his injuries were too great and he died later at a local hospital. Micah, however, was taken to hospital and he was able to be treated for his wounds. The injury across his neck was just millimeters away from his arteries. Thankfully, he was able to survive with a prominent scar running from below his ear to his collarbone. After the attack, the station and Max light rail trains were shut down in both directions for several hours. During his escape, Jeremy ran towards the Providence Medical Center. By 4:50 p.m., the police had him cordoned off. Jeremy resisted arrest, refusing to drop his weapon in a tense standoff with police. Jeremy continued to raise his hands in the air and walk back and forth with his knife, screaming more deranged nonsense. Finally, he threw his knife at a police vehicle, allowing the police services to advance and overpower him. As officers restrained him, Jeremy continued spewing incoherent threats, voicing his hopes that the men he stabbed would die. He then ranted about being a patriot of Vinland, the ancient Viking settlement in North America. He was totally lost in his own delusions, even as he was being dragged away into custody. He was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He also faced 3 misdemeanor charges, including 2 counts of second-degree intimidation and 1 count of being a felon in possession of a restricted weapon. On the 30th of May 2017, Jeremy was brought before the court and had to make his plea. He pleaded not guilty to all of these charges. But that wasn't all.
Yes, Judge, my name is Greg Scholl, 954039 from the Metropolitan.
Free speech or die, Portland. You got no safe place. This is America. Get out if you don't like free speech.
954039 from the Metropolitan Public Defender. With me is Dean Smith, 92464.
Death to the enemies of America. Leave this country if you hate our freedom. Death to Antifa.
No, that's fine. You can just give me the.
You call it terrorism, I call it patriotism. You hear me? Die.
Trial proceedings began on the 6th of June 2017. During these hearings, additional charges were filed against Jeremy for his aggressive incident towards Demetria Hester, which occurred just the day before the stabbings. The trial took a while to begin. Further hearings were carried out in October of 2018, but the trial was set for the 24th of June 2019. However, in February of 2019, Jeremy's attorney filed a notice stating that their intention was to raise mental health defences at the trial. The defence team outlined 3 possible arguments. The first was a guilty except for insanity defence, claiming that Jeremy was too mentally disturbed to form criminal intent. The second argued that his mental illness made him only partially responsible for his actions, and the third defense claimed that Jeremy was acting under extreme emotional disturbance. This pushed the trial to the 28th of January 2020, over 2.5 years later. A psychological report was conducted on Jeremy. It revealed significant psychological impairments and social dysfunctions, and that his actions were exacerbated by alcohol, psychological deterioration, and traumatic prison experiences. The report suggested that he may suffer from multiple psychological disorders, including socialization disorder, hoarding, PTSD, and substance abuse. The psychiatric report suggested that his mindset was far from typical, even amongst extremists. Ultimately, Jeremy was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, whilst his defense team tried to claim that he had autism, attempting to use this as some form of defense. At the trial, prosecutors presented testimonies from 40 witnesses against Jeremy, including Micah Fletcher. A Portland homicide detective also testified, showing the jury the folding knife that was used in the attack. Cell phone videos and surveillance footage capturing the stabbings were also introduced as evidence. The jury also watched extensive videos of Jeremy's post-arrest rants. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Closing arguments were made on the 19th of February 2020, and after 11 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury found him guilty on all counts. During the sentencing hearing, he was removed from the courtroom following an outburst directed at Demetria Hester. He shouted towards her that she was a liar and that he should have killed her after she took to the stand and addressed Jeremy personally. Here is that clip.
You are a waste of breath, and when you die and go to hell, I hope you rot.
See you there.
Now, hey.
Go back to Tennessee too.
What do I tell you?
Go back to Tennessee too.
You can.
We don't want you here. All your race bait. You ain't gonna be there either. You ain't gonna be there either. I should have killed you. Everybody knows you're alive.
The sentencing hearing continued on the 24th of June 2020, where he accepted no guilt for what he had done. He claimed that he was only defending himself and showed absolutely no remorse. As a result, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole for first-degree murder, along with an additional 51.5 years for other related charges. Jeremy later appealed his convictions, alleging court trial errors. On the 17th of June 2024, the Oregon Court of Appeals rejected his arguments and upheld his convictions in full. The trial had taken place during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, following the death of George Floyd. Amid this charged atmosphere, Demetria Hester took to the stand and accused the police of failing to act that day before the Portland train murders. She testified that the officers didn't believe her when she reported Jeremy's threats against her life. She argued that this inaction allowed him to kill 2 innocent men the very next day. She also accused the judge of failing to discipline Jeremy when he acted out in the courtroom or inappropriately addressed witnesses. As on one occasion, the judge who oversaw the case dismissed concerns from witnesses who claimed that Jeremy was winking at them during the trial. The judge had accepted Jeremy's explanation that he had merely been winking at his mother, brushing aside the discomfort and unease his actions had caused in the courtroom. Victim impact statements were also read out. Destiny expressed her gratitude to the 3 men who stepped in to help her. She said that without their heroism, the girls may have fallen victim to Jeremy's horrific and murderous rampage. Ricky Best's family described him as a good man. He was retired from the army after a 20-year career and was a father of 4. Taliesin's family regard him as a hero. He had recently graduated from Reed College with a degree in economics and was working as a consultant. In his last moments, while Jeremy was spreading hate, Taliesin's last words before going unconscious were, "Tell everyone on this train I love them." To this day, Jeremy Joseph Christian has never showed any sign of remorse for what he did.